desire is worship. Desire is worship. Remember, I'm going to show you this from Scripture, and the first way to do that is by reminding you of the definition of the soul. The soul is the stomach of the inner man, right? It's the seat of the appetites. So the way you love someone with your soul is by lifting up your soul to that person. That is, looking to that person alone to satisfy your appetites. So when you feel the cravings of the inner man, things like a craving for strength, or a craving for love, or a craving for meaning, or for motivation, or whatever it is, and you look around and say, what would satisfy this longing I have, this desire I have, this craving I have? What would do it? What would make me... Well, there it is. That would do it. Whatever you point to, as soon as you point to something, that is worship. That's saying, there it is, that would satisfy. That is an act of worship. And that thing that you're pointing to is the object of your worship. Now, that's a pretty radical claim that I just made. It goes against the way I think most Christians think naturally. Most people, I think, feel like you're not really guilty of worshiping that thing unless you just go overboard. You're not really guilty of idolatry unless you just have out-of-control desire for something. That's idolatry. So, for example, you ask somebody, when does food become an idol? Well, when you're at, you just out-of-control eating, you're eating way too much, it's controlling your life, dominating your life, then it's an idol. And so the solution to idolatry is just back off on your desires, desire that thing a little bit less, enjoy that thing a little bit less, and then you get it in balance, and you get moderation, right? That's what most people, I think, would say. But what I'm saying here is very different than that. What I'm saying is, anytime you look to anything as a source of the satisfaction of the needs of the soul, appetites of the soul, that is worship. So if you're looking to God, then it's pleasing, acceptable, wonderful worship. If you're looking to anything else besides God, it is idolatry, regardless of how moderate or extreme you are. Moderate idolatry is just as idolatrous as overboard idolatry. So let me see if I can show you that in Scripture. I need to defend this statement that desire is worship. I want to show you that. And the way I'm going to show you is that there are two objects in Scripture that are the object of lifting your soul. Scripture speaks of lifting your soul to a couple of different things. Psalm 25:1, to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. There's one. And then the other, Psalm 24:3, who may stand in this holy place? He who does not lift up his soul to an idol. The only two things in all of the Scriptures that anybody ever lifts their soul to is either God or an idol. Why? Because lifting your soul is worship. Looking to something to satisfy the needs of the inner man is worship. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 2. I'll show you another passage that supports this. Now, in Jeremiah 2, the issue is idolatry. It's all about idolatry. The people are being rebuked for that. In verse 11, you see that, Jeremiah 2:11. Has any nation ever changed its gods? Yet they are not gods at all. But my people have exchanged their glory for worthless idols. So clearly the problem is idolatry, right? That's the context. But look how he describes that idolatry in the next couple verses. Verse 12. Be appalled at this, O heaven. Shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water. Okay, that's sin number one. Sin number one in their idolatry, step one in their idolatry, was forsake God as a spring. Okay? It doesn't say they forsook him as a master. It doesn't say they forsook him as a king. It doesn't say they forsook him as a lawgiver. The crux of the matter was that they turned their back on him as a spring of water. At the core of their idolatry was they stopped coming to God to drink. Now, this is obviously a metaphor. God is not literal H2O. We understand that. It's a metaphor describing refreshment, enjoyment, satisfaction of desire. satisfaction of thirst. That's what water illustrates. And so stage one of their idolatry was when they stopped coming to God for that. They stopped looking to God for that to satisfy the thirst of their soul. Say, okay, what was stage two of their idolatry? What was sin number two? Because they said they did two sins. Verse 13, my people have committed two sins. Number one, they've forsaken me, the spring of living water. And number two, they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. A cistern is a holding tank for water, right? So they're looking for some other water source. Sin number one is they stopped looking to God to satisfy the thirst of their souls. Sin number two is they started looking to some other source to satisfy the thirst of their soul. You say, what other source? Any other source. It doesn't matter. Any other source. They looked somewhere besides God to satisfy their souls. Now, think about that. How is that idolatry? How does that count as idolatry? If idolatry is worshiping a false god, how is it idolatry to seek satisfaction for the thirst of the soul from some other source besides God? You see what this is teaching us here about what worship is? At the core of worship is drinking. Whatever source you go to for water, whatever source you look to for joy and strength and refreshment and encouragement, that's your God. And the act of looking to that thing for that joy and comfort and strength, and that's your worship. When you drink from some spring to satisfy your soul, you are worshiping that thing that you're drinking from. That's why it's idolatry to go to any other source besides God. Because it's worship. Desire is worship. If you long to go to God's fountain and drink from Him and look to Him alone, that is pleasing, acceptable worship. Don't think of worship as mainly just singing songs. Worship, if you want to know what worship is anything that honors God as God. Okay? Anything that honors God as God, that's worship. Anytime you treat Him as God, you're worshiping Him. Anytime you treat something else as God, you're worshiping that thing. And it's idolatry. That's why Colossians 3:5 says greed is idolatry. And Ephesians 5 says the same thing. Greed is idolatry. Why? Because the one thing that we're allowed to be greedy for is the presence of God. That's the only thing we're allowed to be greedy for. God. Greedy for anything else, idolatry. Because you're putting that thing in the place of God. That's God's place. So the reason why last Sunday's sermon was God-centered and not man-centered, the reason all those songs we just sang are God-centered, not man-centered, is because desire is worship. The focus of all this is the glory of God. It glorifies God. Nothing showcases God's glory better than our desiring Him and delighting in Him. Obviously, if you want to show something to be great, desire does that more than anything else. More than just talk. More than singing. More than testimony. If I tell you a restaurant is great, that's one thing. But if you can tell that I want to go there, that's more of an endorsement, isn't it? If I want to show the greatness of a restaurant, I don't show the greatness of a restaurant by saying, I force myself to go there even though I don't want to. That doesn't show the greatness of the restaurant. That just shows my self-discipline. What shows the greatness of the place is say, I go there because it's my favorite place to eat. If you want to showcase the glory of a piece of art, you don't say, I force myself to look at it. You say, I can't take my eyes off it. And the greatest way to honor God is to desire Him and delight in Him. If we serve God out of sheer resolve and self-discipline, the world will see that and be impressed with us. If we serve God out of desire and delight, the world will see that and be impressed with